Welcome back to another episode of What Happened, the show that semi-regularly makes you say, oh yeah, that game. Speaking of which, let me present to you the 2005 GameCube classic, Geist.
Told you I'd be back. I'm tough to kill.
Was Nintendo trying to make the Metroid Prime lightning strike twice? Was it their Halo killer?
Nope.
Or was it just an oddball FPS destined to live alongside Odama and future Tactics Uprising at the bottom of the bargain bins? Well, expand your mind and attach your soul to a dish of dog food. It's time to find out what happened to Geist.
It's about time.
The tale of this perilous paranormal project starts with NSpace, an Orlando studio originally financed by Sony Computer Entertainment of America to develop games for the PS1, which they very much did, because these games were PlayStation as shit. Bug Riders, Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, Danger Girl, and a copious amount of Olsen Twins titles.
Ashley, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. No kidding, Mary Kate.
Now, I know there are two schools of thought here, but they're both wrong. Sweet 16 License to Drive was a massive improvement on Magical Mystery Mall. That's just facts.
So I started out on Mary Kate and Ashley, which was great fun.
Anyway, SCEA didn't actually own NSpace, and somewhere between Mary Kate and Ashley titles, they heard that Nintendo of America, possibly due to the success of Metroid Prime, had put out a call for a first-person game that wasn't just following shooter trends. NSpace higher-ups caught wind of this and immediately started brainstorming a concept to sell. They came up with multiple ideas, but settled on one that, while appearing to be a standard FPS at first glance, had a hidden twist. In a 2005 interview with Planet GameCube, now Nintendo World Report, NSpace president Eric Dyke explained, "One of the ideas we liked was an idea about playing an invisible agent, like an invisible man, that would use guns, and because they're invisible, they would be able to scare and intimidate people. Some people liked it, some people felt something was missing. We came up with a variation on it that basically says, what if you're a ghost, and if you need a weapon, you possess a person that has a gun, or if you need a pair of hands, you possess someone who can do manual work." From there, it kind of snowballed. Also, the ghost aspect still gave us a voyeuristic scare and messing with people aspect that we liked about the invisible idea. As for a name, the team were looking at the straightforward but marketable Fear, but apparently had to abandon it because of the No Fear clothing line. With that one shot down, they then arrived at Geist, which was another name that they had been considering. After landing on this concept, they self-funded a prototype with the explicit goal of getting Nintendo's attention, which they absolutely did. Nintendo of America felt like the idea had plenty of promise, and their Japanese HQ, known as Nintendo Co. Limited or NCL, felt the same once they got their hands on it. NSpace would spend the next 6 months in an experimentation phase, working together with NCL, fleshing out new ideas, and even getting a lot of insight and feedback from Shigeru Miyamoto himself. Miyamoto found the possession mechanics interesting, imagine that, and brought up the idea of possessing inanimate objects in addition to the meat puppets already controllable in the earlier builds. Miyamoto had immediately commented on an idea of object possession. When the team had first heard, they didn't know exactly what he meant. They kind of thought he might just be joking around. Apparently, he has that kind of sense of humor in the workplace. Eventually, Miyamoto-san just said, "I think the possession aspect of this game is great, and I want to know what it's like to not just possess humans and animals, but what it would be like to possess a box, or what it would be like to possess a plant." During one of NCL's visits, it became a priority to do some experimentation with object possession, and then figure out how to fit that into the game we were already developing. That was a little bit of a curveball. It added some work onto things, but we're really happy where it ended up. Nintendo felt what they had was good enough to show at their E3 2003 show, and their press release for Geist stated that it was going to be part of that year's holiday lineup, which it would famously miss by a lot. In fact, Geist would actually take almost 2 more years to start haunting GameCube disc trays. In that same Planet GameCube interview, Eric Dyke elaborated on what caused this series of delays, going from winter 2003 to 2004 to its final release in summer of 2005. According to him, NCL and NSpace saw the game in two different lights. To NSpace, it was a first-person shooter with a possession mechanic, whereas Ninty saw an adventure game with some first-person shooting. Since Nintendo was calling the shots, much of the game was redesigned over time to be more in line with their vision, doubling down on all the ghostly aspects. Instead of levels where you were running and or gunning through enemies, occasionally possessing a guard or an engineer along the way, much of Geist's gameplay started revolving around environmental puzzles. Ted Newman further explained how this readjusting of the core gameplay elements took a lot of trial and error. There would be times where they would ask us to add something to the game that Nintendo staff thought of. Sometimes we would just scratch our heads a little and say, well, we're not quite sure how that's going to work. But Nintendo is very big on experimentation, and a lot of times they want to put something in the game to see it, and sure enough, just about everything they did ask us to add, we got to the point where it was in the game and we got to play it that we said, wow, that does work. Now, something that's interesting overall about Geist's development is that despite massive delays and, spoilers, eventual failure at retail, NSpace staff routinely describe the process of working so closely with Nintendo very positively, expressing that the partnership was genuinely good for the game, while regarding Geist as a truly shared product, and that the development process was a wonderful experience, which doesn't happen too often on this show. While the gameplay was getting overhauled, big changes were also coming to the story and its protagonist, John Ramey. NSpace had initially gone with a gruff, battle-hardened agent, citing Jack Bauer as a major source of inspiration.
That would explain everything.
Nintendo, however, felt the character should be more of an everyman with very little combat experience, allowing him and the player to grow together as the game went on. This meant that John went from super soldier to super nerd, being rewritten as a civilian scientist, with the new idea being that when he possessed characters, he would take on their traits or skills, positioning him as more of a blank slate. The story and style of Geist was also pretty cinematic, especially for a game published by Nintendo. Aside from outliers like Eternal Darkness, elaborate cutscenes were rare offerings from the publisher, and they typically didn't splurge on well-known voice actors at the time either. Geist, however, was no exception to that last one. This is something that Ted Newman explained. Actually, we were really lucky to have a contract with a local radio station called Real Radio 104.1. It's all talk radio. We approached them and said, listen, we want to see if you want to audition for the voices. We've got a couple of hosts from several of the shows. I think there is like 4 shows that go on throughout the day. We thought they did a great job. Did they though?
The rift, it's collapsed!
The simulation is ready to initialize, sir.
Man, I'm having a bad day.
By March of 2005, Geist was finally coming together and was locked into a specific but also vague June release date. Once June rolled around, Nintendo informed websites and retailers once again that Geist was going to see another delay, this time to its actual final release dates of August 15th in North America, October 7th for Europe, November 3rd for Australia, and never for Japan. Looking at the big picture here, Geist was absolutely NSpace's most ambitious game to date, marking their first attempt at actual unique IP. Unfortunately, this still manifested very little fanfare and only just mixed reviews. Despite the ghostly gameplay hook, possession was routinely cited by critics and fans alike as an element that grew formulaic since you were mostly doing the same things over and over to progress. Most also felt that the FPS action was middling and half-baked and lacked a lot of the impact and polish seen in other successful FPSs of the day. In terms of graphics and performance, Geist was also considered an underachiever. NSpace were still using a custom engine that they had originally built for the PlayStation 1, which may have limited their ability to fully reach the graphical benchmark that folks expected from major GameCube releases. And while Geist's ideas received plenty of praise, it was felt that the two gameplay styles didn't mesh very well, with neither feeling particularly polished. Now, despite nSpace staff apparently happy with their intimate Nintendo partnership, the split focus would ultimately deliver a title that couldn't satisfy either half of the gameplay premise. Now, on to the topic of sales. Well, Geist was dead on arrival.
Oh, what was I laughing at now?
According to NPD Group, Geist failed to make the top 20 for both the month of its release and the subsequent months as well. Even more damning is that it also failed to crack the NPD's top 10 GameCube-only charts, which were printed in Nintendo Power at the time. Heavy hitters like Madden 2006 and Mario Superstar Baseball were topping those charts, with Geist placing below stuff like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and even years-old evergreen titles like Animal Crossing, Kirby Air Ride, and Pokemon Colosseum. Scanning through Nintendo's investor reports for that fiscal year, Geist is only ever mentioned twice, with both those instances just being the release dates for North America and Europe. That's not great. nSpace, for their part, seemed to be trying to move forward with Geist regardless. Rumors of a Nintendo DS version were circulating at the time, and were then later confirmed genuine when people cracked open the files for the nSpace developed Call of Duty 4 for the Nintendo DS. Obviously, nothing came of this, and before too long, nSpace were back to doing grunt work for other studios. They would focus mostly on a surprisingly well-regarded string of Call of Duty and 007 portables, among others. This conveyor belt of licensed games continued until 2012, where they would get to work on their first original IP ever since Geist, this time under Square Enix. Some of you out there might remember the unmemorable Heroes of Ruin for the Nintendo 3DS, an incredibly generic co-op dungeon crawler tested by yours truly. While it was well made and mechanically solid with a robust online mode to boot, it generally didn't resonate with a good percentage of reviewers, who collectively scored it a nice 69 average on Metacritic. Dan O'Leary, nSpace CEO, even publicly said that he felt the 3DS's low install base at the time contributed to the game's commercial failure. Personally, I feel the bland art style and lukewarm reviews were more to blame, but this was back around the time where the 3DS was only finally recovering from its rough launch period, so there's probably a nugget of truth in his statement somewhere. Times were getting tough for nSpace, as evidenced by their last two titles. Firstly, a WWE mobile game of some kind, WWE Champion, Supercard, I don't know, I can never keep those two straight. And then secondly, and lastly, Sword Coast Legends, a D&D licensed game developed alongside Digital Extremes, which wasn't received much better. In fact, it was even worse, and very much did not save the company. In 2016, they announced they had closed their doors before the console versions of Sword Coast Legends had ever even come out. This was a bit of a weird one, I ain't gonna lie. While Nintendo were clearly hoping to capture the same magic Metroid Prime had conjured, John Raimi ain't no Samus, and possessing a bowl of dog food isn't quite as compelling as navigating a morph ball maze. It wasn't the most marketable game, and its multiple delays may have pushed it too far out to make much of an impact. While it failed to resonate with the mainstream audiences though, at least Geist's memory lives on in Smash Bros. Ultimate as— Oh, what? Oh, no assist trophy, like at all. There's not even any spirits. Oh. If you know of any other ghostly gambles, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter. Wait, hang on. If you change the language of Smash Ultimate to German, Sakurai, you madman, you did it again. Or come haunt the halls of the Flophouse VIP Patreon to nominate what you want to see in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching.